Okay, hello, welcome everybody. I thank you again for your patience. If there can be a technological issue, there will be. Let me first introduce myself. Yeah, okay, the name on the presentation isn't wrong. I'm Harry Nichols. I will be running all four of these sessions. Okay, we're going to be starting with logical reasoning when we're talking about which programs you might be interested in applying for. It's the last two which are not applicable to humanities students. So we're going to start with the logical reasoning today. We're going to be talking about the language skills next week. And then the two consecutive weeks after that will be the qualitative skills. Okay. I'm not going to go into a ton about myself because you guys are interested in the university courses, not my background. But my background is in two areas: mathematics, which is my full-time day job as a maths teacher, and I'm also very, very interested in philosophy. Okay, lots of people will be confused by that pairing. This is the link. Okay, this is the link, logical reasoning. And as far as the English courses will go, I think a few of you would have worked out my advantage there. So let's start talking about what you can expect from this logical reasoning test. We're going to talk about the question types, okay? When you're opening up the book, you're opening up information on this exam. It can be a little bit daunting. It can be a little bit scary when you're looking at all these different question types they might be throwing at you. So we're going to go through a lot of these different question types. We're going to go through examples together. I'm going to be giving you examples of good techniques, how to cut down that all-important exam time. We will be going through these section by section. I generally plan it so that we'll have the logical reasoning questions that are sort of more direct logical reasoning in the first half of this presentation. And then in the second half, we will be talking about the more mathematical elements, again, very much what I like, and some of the analogies, and we'll get onto that syllogisms. Don't worry if you don't know what that word means now. I will include that. Okay, so this first logical reasoning section, it's quite a big section, okay? We've got lots of little subtypes here, okay? Most of these I have listed in this second point here. I'm not going to be one of these people who reads off their slides. I trust your reading here. Okay, so we're going to be testing a wide variety of logical skills, particularly finding unstated assumptions. Sometimes that will be explicitly what the question is asking you about. Sometimes it will be a key component to get to what the question is really asking you about. I will tell you that actually it's not quite as scary, not quite as concerning as all these different question types look, because a lot of them are going to have overlapping skills. A lot of them are going to have techniques which apply to plenty more than one type of question. So you're not going to have to absolutely fill your head with different exam techniques for all these different questions. I will highlight this bottom point now, because it's where people can start getting themselves in trouble. But it's also good news. You do not need to rely on external knowledge. Let me go one step further. You absolutely should not be relying on external knowledge. Chances are it means you're putting in your own opinion and you're mistaking it for fact. That is not something that goes down particularly well in the logical reasoning section. So it's good news. You don't have to have an extensive academic background in any of these sections they're going to be asking about. But yeah, please do keep in mind when you're reading through your own answers, be critical of yourself. Am I bringing in my own thoughts? Okay, we'll talk a little bit about general advice, and then we'll get on to the more specific question types. if you might have heard a phrase that if you have 4 hours to cut down a tree, you should spend 3 hours sharpening the axe. Okay, and that's going to apply a lot here. If you can really get a solid understanding of the logical structure that's falling underneath these questions, that's really pinning it up, often then answering it will be so much quicker. So much quicker. So it's worth investing the time, getting a clear understanding of what they're saying. Also get a clear understanding of what they're not saying, okay? Particularly when we get into the assumptions, if they're saying A implies B, and then they've suddenly mentioned a C, what's bringing those two together? Okay, if you can get a good understanding of that underlying logic, you're gonna get a good start. I'm using a slightly technical philosophy term here, not the craziest, okay? I want you to pay close attention to what we call quantifiers. These are words like some, all, none, only, a few, some quantity of these things. Especially when we get onto the syllogisms towards the end and some of the more stripped back logical structure. These are going to be the keywords, okay? These are going to be the keywords. Okay, that's enough of the preamble. Let's get into these specific question types you can be expecting. Here they are. Okay, we've got critical reasoning. This is just understanding the arguments and understanding if they're giving good inferences in the question. Are they giving bad inferences in the question? We're going to talk about what even is the difference between a good inference and a bad inference. We're going to be talking about deductions, drawing conclusions, and making decisions. Even within the first two question types, I'm sure you can see a lot of overlap. Okay, you're not going to have to be covering four entirely different question types. The analytical puzzles are where we're going to start getting a little bit more towards the mathematics side of things. But as you see, the real mathematics falls in this last section of other reasoning. Okay. But this will be things like ordering puzzles. These are really common. I'll be honest, they just seem to like them. Okay, so these will be ordering puzzles where they give you enough information. Think about like a Sudoku. They give you enough information if you implement that information in the correct order. We'll be going in plenty more detail through those, don't worry. I'm not just mentioning that and moving on. Even in the critical reasoning, we have subsections, okay? This is why I'm expecting this and perhaps the next section to be our first half. We've got to be really, with this first type, we've got to be really skeptical, be really specific about conclusions. Okay, day to day, you will hear people jump to conclusions, not in the obvious way you're thinking about, but they will take a really well thought out argument, really well put together, and then at the end, their conclusion will be way over here. Okay, so we've got to talk about when is conclusion legitimate and why. Inference questions sound very similar, but they're not explicitly given as a conclusion. They will give you a whole bunch of information, and there will be little subparts of information, things which have to be true given the information in the text. It's not necessarily a conclusion, it's a hidden piece of bonus information. This inference-based questions are going to be focused on that. Okay. Assumption-based questions are actually, I would say, the ones most applicable to real life. People will make good arguments, but one of the premises, again, slightly technical term, but one of the points which they are relying upon, they won't mention out loud. It will just be something that you can, again, infer from the rest of their argument. So we're going to be looking at finding those assumptions. Again, a key skill in real life. People know when they're using bad assumptions, so they hide them. Don't let them. And then we're going to be talking lastly about strengthening and weakening arguments. We'll have an argument presented in a piece of text. And from there, we will be thinking, okay, what if this extra piece of information is true? Does that help this statement? Does that hurt this statement? Does that get in the way of what they're trying to say, or does it make it so much better? I'll just leave it there. A lot of these we're going to get a better idea of by sort of looking at questions themselves. Let's move on to the conclusions. Okay, not a normal place to start a presentation. Main pieces of advice. Avoid being too strong. If you're making a really broad conclusion about many things, chances are it's not that sound. Okay, chances are you're reaching further than you ought to. So just temper your conclusions, manage them. Don't sort of feel like a stronger conclusion is a better conclusion. It's frequently the other way around. Okay, frequently the other way around. Because this next point, because you want to avoid unnecessary assumptions. If you give me a conclusion that's too strong, I can probably give you the assumption that that conclusion relies upon, right? I've been practicing myself. I've mentioned not using your own information, so I will just draw to your attention this last section. Looking out for keywords such as so, therefore, hence, because. These are going to give you really strong clues, just like the quantifiers, towards the logical structure of the argument you're looking at. Sometimes these things are best explained with examples. Okay, so let's have a look at this example here. Can you mute your microphone, please? Okay. Hopefully that feels like enough reading time. We've got a few of these questions to be looking at, and I don't want to sort of sit here reading them out loud for each of them. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit, of course. But even before we do, have a look through the answer options. Which ones seem reasonable? Which are sort of reasonable but only in a relaxed conversational way? But if you have someone being really strict, imagine a maths teacher getting you to show you're working. And then which ones of these can you really believe in? Okay, with someone making you defend them. So, A looks pretty convincing, right? A looks pretty convincing. We're talking about how in the past, looking at that third line, 15 years ago, cataract surgery was painful and not effective all the time. So very few people having successful cataract surgery at that point seems really plausible, right? It's borderline exactly what they're saying. It's the borderline you need to be careful of. Does anyone have any idea what might be a problem with A? Does anyone have any idea what might be a problem with A?
Maybe the word very few. It wasn't mentioned in the.
Yes, and that is something that's going to come up a lot. Okay, if the text is talking about something which even sounds really similar, but the answer itself is talking about something slightly different. You need something connecting the two. Why does unaffected, not effective all the time mean very few people? Specifically, wasn't that long ago, but you had people during COVID who were saying, oh, why are we hiding away? Only like 1% of people are dying. Was it very few people? No, because it was 1% of 8 billion, right? Or 1% of a massive number. That's not going to be very few people, and it's not here either. Maybe with a reasonable piece of connecting information, we could justify this. But right now we can't. Okay, so it looks real tempting, but you've got to be very, very strict with yourself. Answer B, it's a very good educated guess. It would shock me hugely if in the long term these advancing medical technologies will be outweighed by the disadvantage. However, I don't care if it's plausible, I care if it comes from the text. Okay, this is a very good educated guess. However, it is an educated guess. It does not follow directly from the text. It does not follow directly from the text at all. It's very much a key example of someone bringing in their preformed ideas, their preformed thoughts. So what about C? The total amount spent on cataract surgery has increased because the increased number of people choosing to have the surgery more than offsets the decrease in cost per operation. That seems like a really wordy answer, right? It's hard to see that directly from the text. However, this is, spoilers, absolutely our correct answer. It comes down to, like I said, these connecting facts. If it says, as it does indeed, that it has gotten cheaper, but still the total amount of money has increased, I'm sure you can imagine that it gets cheaper and we get slightly less money. In that case, we couldn't really say that much. But here, seeing that we've got it's become cheaper and the total revenue is more, then yes, we can absolutely we can absolutely infer that the increased number has more than offset the price decrease. Okay, think of going to get a new shirt, whatever, from Primark. They make way more money. Okay, maybe I've picked a UK brand. But those cheap retail stores make way more money because you sell 100 times as much at half the price, right? It's more than worth it, and that's what's happening here. We absolutely have enough to deduce this. Okay, we already know the correct answer, but D has problems with the word affordable. Okay, do we have specific reference to affordability in the paragraph? No, we don't. No, we don't. So we've got to be real skeptical of answers that don't line up like that. E is perhaps another good educated guess, but it does not follow from the paragraph. Okay, so this is what you can be expecting for the conclusions. In a in a pub with your friends having a chat, all of these might be reasonable. Most of them might be reasonable. But here you've got to be really, really strict with it. Really strict with it. Let's talk about inference. Kind of similar, as I mentioned in the introduction, to drawing conclusions. Kind of similar to drawing conclusions, but it's not going to be the main thing, the whole build up, the end of the road that the statement is heading towards. It'll be the little parts underneath, not necessarily that are being relied upon for the argumentative structure, but things that must be true given all the information in the text. A lot of the advice about conclusions will still apply. Be careful, be aware if you need, and lots of these will be those connecting pieces of information, getting what's in the statement to match up with what's in the answers or what they start talking about next. These are not perhaps, maybes, most likelies. Okay, these are absolute certainties. Absolute certainties. Here we have an example. Here we have an example. Again, I'm just going to give you a moment to read it. We'll end up talking about it, but I don't want to be reading all of these out. Okay, so company S isn't doing so well. Company S isn't doing so well. And answer A, the people in Japan prefer cars manufactured by companies T and H to those manufactured by company S. Again, most of us would think that was a reasonable conclusion and make it in our heads quite quickly. I'm going to ask you a similar question. What's the problem? What's the problem? Seems very reasonable.
Sales don't have to be from people.
Yeah. So we're definitely going to need a connector, like you referenced correctly last time. I'm not sure that's sort of exactly the right. What's the answer in A really talking about? What's the answer in A really talking about? It's talking about people's preferences, right? The text is not talking about people's preferences. It's talking about sales. We need some connector that says sales are based on nothing but people's preferences. Something like that. For this to be a valid conclusion, we need the extra piece of information that sales are based on nothing but people's preferences. And if that were true, why spend money on advertising? If that were true, we would have no other factors affecting sales. Okay, so yeah, maybe company S just didn't advertise enough. Okay, maybe indeed they export their cars and then primary sales are not domestic, not in Japan. Make sure that you're linking what the answer talks about to what the question is talking about. If you have to work too hard to do that, probably not the right answer. Probably not the right answer. Same with part B, right? Most likely very true. But we don't work with most likelies. We don't work with most likelies. Maybe it's an advertising thing. Maybe they just can't manufacture them enough quickly to sell them. There could be other factors. Speaking of there could be other factors, why is it the flimsy bills in answer C? Could be anything. Those are just picked out randomly. Not good. Okay, I know we're jumping an answer, but in a time pressured situation, you see they're talking about company D. Don't need to read the rest of the question. I don't even need to know what the rest of that answer is. It's talking about a company that's not in the question. We're just going to move on. So, process of elimination indeed gives us D. And there was nothing wrong with process of elimination, right? Multiple choice is a good advantage for that reason. But we need to see what are the two key pieces of information which lets us sort of infer D. The price is approximately the same. And S is selling less. Revenue is just sales times price, right? So that's enough for us to go, yeah, no, they're not going to be making as much revenue. Okay, much more direct. Fact A plus fact B gives us conclusion. No guesswork, no maybes, no connectors required. Okay. This is, I'm not a very exciting man, but this is my favorite section of the exam. Okay, because in my view, it applies most to real life. People won't even realize they're making these assumptions themselves. Sometimes you've got to point it out to them. Really common, well repeated, but ultimately bad arguments have these underlying assumptions under them. You got to be watching out for them. Not every assumption is bad. Some assumptions are perfectly justifiable. They just need to be highlighted. Okay, so it's very hard to make any sort of argument without some underlying assumption, even if you draw it to attention. But you should still see that it's an assumption. Essentially, as the last point talks about, it is a skill in inference within yourselves. Okay, how can you infer which, where the gaps in their argument are, and what is required to fill it? That will be the assumption. Okay, I'll give you some reading time while I see how shaken up this is. Okay, cool. So, before actually going through the answers, giving you the similar process that I have with the previous questions, I want to draw attention to the fact that this same piece of text could be in another question type. There's an implication here. There's an implication here. Where it says, according to the recent change in education policies of Macon City, the colleges of Macon City are expected to increase their fees to almost the same level as those charged by the colleges in Tupac City. That tells you that right now Tupac City is more expensive. At no point is it written Tupac City is more expensive, but there is no way that sentence can be true without it already being more expensive. So that's how these inferences would be done if this was an inference question. Okay, lots of these structures will present the same. Okay. Which of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends? Okay, let's do this one like it's an exam. We've got a lot of these. We don't need to be wasting time, neither now nor in the exam. Nothing connects the quality of teaching to people moving. Colleges, cross, done, go. Do we have anything to say that Tupac City does not have good colleges? No, been gone. Okay. But what are we looking for? Okay, we can sometimes just eliminate some of these. We can eliminate E as well. We're not talking about the number of colleges. But what we are looking to fill in is the gap between increase in fees and enrollment, right? We're talking about enrollment at the end in this therefore. Remember, I told you to look out for these words like therefore. They're concluding about enrollment numbers. But all the information before that is about education fees. So we know the underlying assumption is going to be one that makes those two connect. So low fees being charged by colleges and Mekong City is the primary reason why students from Tupac City move to these colleges. That's really the only one which can play that connection role and play it well. Okay, this is absolutely the correct assumption. Okay, and this is why I say it comes up most in real life. People will talk and give you a whole bunch of information you agree with, and then suddenly you don't agree with their conclusion because you jumped a massive assumption in the middle, something connecting what you said to what you concluded. Okay. Looks slightly different from the others, but it's really similar within the structure. Why were you curbing his freedom? Be dignified. Okay, this one's short. I will be down. Again, looking through a few of these, we can probably just eliminate some quite quickly. Though this does also remind me to highlight something else as well. Okay, for those people coming next week, we will talk more about this in the honing your language skills area. Often the type of language they use in these questions is beyond native, let's say, okay? 18th century English, talking really, and that can be very difficult. So say you're going through these and you don't know the word disparate. Fair enough. Okay, it's not crazy uncommon, but it's not the most frequent word you're going to hear. Same with the word encroaching. Okay, if someone reads through this exam and they don't know that word, I can't bring myself to blame them. Okay, couple of little tips. Yes, infer, try and work out what the word means from what is around it. Also be aware that no two answers are going to be synonymous. Okay, so whatever disparate means, it probably doesn't mean the same as encroaching. Otherwise, C and E are going to be the same answer. Okay. So, A. Actually, if everyone's read these answers, I'll sort of flip back and forth between the next two slides. Okay. We're not talking about dignity and freedom may coexist as, at will. The book says it because the subject is not mentioned. And that can be the reason, okay, we want to be a little bit more specific than that, especially when the question involves a his, we are talking about someone. But it's not really specific enough. We can do better than that. Someone was curbing someone else's freedom seems like a really good option. And it's undeniably true. The problem is it's not really an implication, right? It's told to you pretty explicitly. It's involved in the data, or it's involved pretty directly in the very short text. Okay, so we're not really talking about it like it's an implication. Yeah, so if you don't know the word disparate, that means freedom and dignity are entirely separate. You never have both. But that is in direct contradiction with the question, right? If you can't have both. For part D, if it's impossible to retain your dignity without stepping on someone's freedom, there would be no reason to question it. They had no choice, right? In fact, it's very much going to be E, the exact opposite of D. It's perfectly possible to maintain one's self-respect without encroaching on someone else's freedom. Okay? Because if it was not, again, why would you question them on it? It would be necessary. It would be the only option. So, reminder, when I say implication, I'm talking about things which cannot not be true, given what we have here. Okay, let's talk about strengthening and weakening an argument. This will, I suspect, be one of the more intuitive ones that hopefully make sense as we're reading it through. It's a little less, it's a little less hidden, a little less guarded under the argument structure. I mentioned that assumptions will come up anyway, okay? It's really difficult to make an argument without having an underlying assumption. It's not always bad, okay? Some assumptions can be really well justified. And this section is going to focus on that, okay? Just because you have an unstated assumption doesn't mean it's a bad argument. So I'll give you a hint. If you're not willing to make your assumptions clear, then it's probably a bad argument. Okay. So we're going to be looking at these underlying assumptions, and we're going to be looking at how can this be a strong assumption? How can that gap be filled well? And just so you know, it will be one or the other. The argument will tell you pick the selection which strengthens the argument or pick the argument which weakens it. Okay, you'll not have to sort of make your own personal choice there. A little bit less reading this time, but there is still a little bit of reading. First thing here, I'm going to repeat myself, and I'm going to repeat myself proudly because this is what I want going through your head in the exam. Notice what the claims are talking about. Not just in the answers, but in the question as well. We can get rid of A immediately. We have why would even if they were the oldest manufacturer of laptops, how would that help the argument being made? Within the question itself, we're looking at a claim about fast processors, and then they're trying to back that argument up with sales figures. So we know we're looking for a connecting part. We know we're looking for something that fixes laptop sales to processors. So B's out. Yes, we're talking about sales, but even then, non-directly in market share. We've got no talk of processors. C is a little bit better. We've got some talk of processors, but it's not linking to anything. We're not specifically linking that to our sales figures. So we're getting warmer, but it's not quite there yet. D, all of laptops available for sale in Ireland are the same in every aspect except for their processors. Notice we're still not talking directly about sales figures. Realistically, there's an assumption even under this assumption. And that assumption is that sales depend on best specs, essentially, right? But again, not every assumption is a bad one. That's a very reasonable thing to think be true. So yes, even though it's kind of indirectly, D is not talking about sales figures. They're definitely suggesting it, right? Because they're talking about them being otherwise identical, so that's going to affect the sales figures. Okay, part E is just talking about a random other company, which has not really been mentioned in the introduction, definitely not linking us up to processes. So the answer here is definitely D. Definitely D. Okay, so I want to give you this advice about finding those connectors, but it's not going to be quite as simple as scan the words quickly, see which one says processes and says sales. That's a good general guide. It's not going to be that simple overall, so you will need to sort of infer from there a little bit. Again, I will give you a moment to read. Also notice this is now a weaker question. I'm not asking you to make this argument stronger. I'm asking you to make it weaker. Okay, let's look at these answers. So his argument is mainly economical, right? He's talking about pay, how much it costs. But he is also talking about making sure that people can speak Hindi, right? It's not just about money. So we've got options. Remember, we're trying to weaken the argument. The government translates official documents into more than 18 languages to reach people who cannot read or write Hindi. Not necessarily weakening the argument. In fact, that's a lot of what they're talking about. So not really contradictory, not really making the argument weaker. Hindi is already the most spoken language in India. Okay, again, we need some sort of connecting thought between it being the most spoken and being the official language. But right now it's closer to strengthening the argument than weakening it here. People who do not know Hindi also pay taxes to the government of India. This is plausible. You again need to include, well, let me ask you, what's the hidden assumption in C? What links what is being said in answer C to what's actually been given in the question? Not all hidden assumptions are bad, but all of them should be highlighted. Any ideas? It's arguably a very reasonable assumption, but the only way this even applies to what is being said is with the underlying assumption that people that pay taxes deserve to have the money spent on them. Right? If you're spending that tax, if you're giving that money to the government in form of tax, that could be an argument that it should be translated for you. Your money should be spent towards you. It's not unreasonable. You know, no taxation without representation, historically speaking. Many people who travel across the country learn Hindi within a year. This strengthens the argument again. It suggests that it's actually quite easy for people to learn Hindi, so it's worth people learning Hindi rather than spending all this government money. or people's money? At this point, you can probably tick E before you've even read it. But I cannot imagine anything more weakening for an argument for Hindi being the official language of the country than Hindi already being the official language of the country. What are we doing here? Why are we having this conversation? Okay. Don't worry, I'm not skipping past anything I haven't already said. Okay, we have a couple of miscellaneous questions, ones which aren't worth forming their own sections really, but are worth mentioning. I had to put paradox in quotes for this first part. Again, I'm a lover of logic, maths and philosophy, and people use the word paradox really loosely. And apparently whoever wrote this exam had the same problem I do. Lots of these paradoxes, well, the entire type of question is highlighting how paradoxes are not paradoxes, or things which seem to be in tension, seem exclusive, they can't both be true at the same time, absolutely can be. Okay? And we'll move on to parallel reasoning, but it's specifically going to be around taking an argument structure and writing it or making it more explicit so that you can see when some other piece of text has the same underlying structure. As a maths teacher, the way I like to think about this is putting everything in terms of variables, okay? What's actually in that slot is much less important than how those slots interact, how those slots go together. Here we go. So this is a paradox question. Okay. And yeah, I picked this example for a reason, because this is exactly the sort of paradox people will be talking about. Things where you would expect one to go down as the other goes up, but then there's some instance where they're both going up, they're both going down, etc. A lot of times this will be because there are more variables involved than that, right? In this case, it's not just sort of price and income. You got to think about number sold. You've got to think about which of these factors are outweighing the others. Lots of these can be crossed off immediately. Why are we talking about tobacco use, specifically banned by the government? We're not. Move on. We just don't have enough information to be sure of B. Yeah, however, can we see that there is a sensitivity towards the price of tobacco? It seems to suggest a fall. Okay, 8% is a relatively small fall, but a fall in prices nonetheless. And D and E probably aren't worth mentioning, to be honest, right? We're not talking about alternative products. We're not really talking about the black market. Yeah, let's look at these answers one by one. Yes, don't worry. I'll be flicking back and forth a little bit so you don't have to remember every answer before I go through. Okay, we spoke about A. That was just saying that the government wants to ban tobacco usage. No, move past it quickly. Yeah, so not only is B trying to conclude too far, it's relying on things which aren't within the question. It directly contradicts the question. It says that the sales volume has dropped. It says that the sale volume has dropped. So C is indeed the correct one. So again, just flicking back so that you can see. That's saying that tobacco customers are not sensitive to the price of tobacco. That's because if tax collection rates and revenue have both gone up and sales volume have gone down, that means the price has gone up, right? That means that the price has gone up. So we can infer that the price has increased and consumers are still purchasing tobacco. So this is why C is correct. They also don't go much into D or E for the same reasons I don't. If you can get rid of an option quickly, do so. Okay. Firstly, two pieces of good news. This is one of my favorite questions, just in terms of getting people to bend their brains and think. The other piece of good news is that we're quickly approaching the break. Don't worry, I can see some energy going. And it's not just in you guys. That's fine. So let's talk about parallel reasoning. This is the question type which I really suggest this algebraification of. Okay, I don't care what's going in the variable slots. I care what the structure is. You can swap in, swap out different sections of this whilst keeping the underlying structure very similar. I will also remind you to leave your preformed ideas at the door. Okay? Cool. The fear of contracting swine flu is very high in Asian countries. If only these people could compare the number of people who actually contract swine flu, which is very few, with the number of people who actually contract the common cold, which is very high, then this fear would be assuaged. Again, I don't blame you if you don't know the word assuaged. Okay? But hopefully from the context you can infer that. The reason I like this question is a selection of answers. So, I do not understand why people fear cockroaches, even if they are numerous. The real danger lies with tigers, even though they are few. Check that the things that were being paired together before are being paired together now. People were fearing the rare option, right? So if you switch across here, and people fear the option which has many, the option which is numerous, common, they don't match, right? And again, time is a skill here. If you can recognize that, you're going to save yourself time. Again, looking at B, okay, why do people fear cockroaches even if they are numerous? The danger lies with tigers because they are too numerous to count. Before it was one being rare and one being numerous. Now they're both numerous. Let's read C. Let's read C. I do not understand why people fear cockroaches. They are very few. The real danger lies with tigers because they are too numerous to count. We're listening to enough of me speaking. What do you guys all think about this one? That's what it's going to come down to in the exam. It's like when I'm teaching in a maths classroom. Everyone's convinced when I'm saying it, and then they have the blank sheet in front of them. What do we think about answer C?
I think it's true.
Okay. Okay, we like one vote for liking C. One vote for liking C. Can I ask you why you like
The number of people feeling it is high,
it?
but the actual number is very low, and it's the opposite for the tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. So this little test I gave you to get rid of, discard answers A and B, you can't apply it here. The rare thing is the feared thing, and that is cockroaches. And the thing which is really dangerous is the numerous thing, or the common thing. That doesn't, maybe we can sort of put a question mark next to this. We can say a maybe. But it's passing the first test, so that's looking pretty good to me. I do not understand why people fear cockroaches. They are very few. The real danger lies with tigers because they are few and few. We're talking about hiding places. No, let's read it. I do not understand why people fear cockroaches, even if they are few. The real danger lies with tigers as they are few. Actually, that one rule I've given you, that one helping tip, has limited us down to one answer. Okay, the reason I like this question is as soon as you read through C, your body goes, I know the world, I know tigers, I know cockroaches. Cockroaches are not dangerous, tigers are dangerous, you should fear tigers. Leave your real world knowledge at the door. Okay, it's not important whether what fills that gap necessarily makes sense given the context of the world. What matters is that it fits together in that same structure. So no, I don't think you're going to find many people saying that tigers are numerous and cockroaches are rare. But it's the structure which counts. It's the structure which counts. Yeah, okay. A lot of this is just going to be slightly repeating myself, but it's worth doing so. You want to be really specific about what are they talking about in the question. It's not just going to be one thing. Are they talking about one thing in their argument, in their build-up, and then talking about another thing in their conclusion? Because that is a gap which will need to be tended to. Are they talking about different things in the answers than in the questions? Okay, a lot of times this will help you just simplify your number of options quite quickly. But don't be too hasty. As we saw with the example in the laptops, the processors. C, the correct answer, still didn't directly mention sales figures. But it mentioned enough information to make a claim about sales figures very reasonable. So it's not going to be as simple as that, but it's definitely a good guiding principle. The one that I haven't really mentioned is this middle one, and it's really useful. If you can predict the answers before you look at them, you really understand the question. You really understand the statement. Remember what I said at the beginning. If you have 4 hours to cut the tree, spend 3 sharpening the axe. If you can predict the answers before you're looking at them, your axe is pretty sharp. Okay? You've really understood what that question is saying and what it's not saying. Still, avoid extreme or emotionally intense answers. As I said, strong conclusions are often not the best ones. Right. Okay. I'm suspecting that when we have the break at 5 o'clock, it won't fall right in the middle of a section. But I'm afraid that it's crazy considering it's a 3-hour lecture. We are actually still going to be pretty close for time. Okay, last year I did this and we nearly ran over. So let's talk about deductions. Okay. Really, I'm going to highlight the last 3 that I've mentioned here. Because the first 2 you're going to immediately realize are very similar to the first section. I told you there's going to be a lot of overlap. There's going to be a lot of overlap. So let's talk about course of action. This will just be, you are given a problem, you are given a situation, and you are told which of these possible courses of action would solve this problem the best. If I have any other fans of philosophy this will be by the utilitarian definition of good. The most good for the most people, that's it. They're not trying to get into deep moral philosophy of what is good. They're just taking that as the answer, okay? Sometimes, and we will get further into that, it will be, there are 3 options and you need to take 2 of them, okay? For example, it will not just be one specifically or the other. The fact analysis. The fact analysis is actually going to come with a lot of the same techniques I've been mentioning in the previous sections. The reason this is slightly different is purely due to the fact that they are, let's say, more condensed. They give it to you in a short form. They've boiled it down to the key essentials for you, rather than that having to be something you do yourself. But for that reason, a lot of this is already going to be sort of helped by the first 2 parts. The argument part, we'll get to it. Won't be too much of an exception to anything I've mentioned so far. For this one and only for this one, I have included the answer box so you know what it looks like. This is what I mean when I say it's not just 1, 2, 3, or 4. We can't even conclude only 4. It's not an option. We can have 1, only 2. We can have only 3. We can have 1 and 3. We can have 3 and 4. Okay, so not every possibility is even going to be an option for us. Not every possibility is even going to be an option for us. So, all of those who had passed the eligibility test were given jobs as teachers in government schools. Just to warn you, a couple of things in this section, you can see that the end of it has been slightly cut off. In cases where it's not exactly clear what I mean, I'll clarify it, but it's not really a serious problem. So, all those who have passed the eligibility test were given jobs as teachers in government schools. A lot of this is also going to come into the syllogisms. Don't worry, I'll explain that in the second half, and I'll explain what that even means. Okay. This first one, it does not come from the statement. Okay. Maybe you can't see that immediately from the statement, but again, it's the structure which counts. If I tell you all eagles are birds, you believe me. If I tell you all birds are eagles, you look at me like I'm crazy. Okay? So no, you can't just swap them. That's not how this works. So we can get rid of conclusion 1 immediately. How do we know that there are no government schools now without teachers who have not passed this eligibility test? You should be very careful not to jump like that. What about some government schools now have teachers who have passed the eligibility test? we're getting more reasonable, right? We definitely can't be dismissing this one outright from the beginning. But however, can we conclude it with 100%? Well, assuming that we have at least one teacher who passed this eligibility test, they have to go somewhere. And that place will indeed then have a government school, will then have a teacher who passed the eligibility test. So yeah, we can. As long as some have passed the eligibility test. Also, just going to draw attention, this thing I said at the beginning about quantifiers, some, all, etc. From here on out is where that advice is really going to apply. These all, some type of words are definitely important. Definitely important. And again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to focus on number 4 when it's clearly incorrect. Okay. Here we have a lot of the advice I mentioned when I spoke about this question type to begin with. Don't use your outside views. If you must choose between ideal and practical, choose ideal. This third point is what I mean by utilitarianism. Just look for the most good for the most people. You're not expected to be moral philosophers here. Here, I have not included an answer box, but think along similar lines. It will not just be course of action 1 or course of action 2. There will be an option for neither. There will be an option for both. And when we get to further questions which have more than 2 courses of action, that advice will still apply. Maybe it's 2 out of 3, etc. So, researchers are feeling agitated as libraries are not equipped to provide the right information to the right users at the right time in the required format. Even the users are not aware about the various services available to them. This is a good question for me to include in a presentation like this, because you can see this statement really has 2 problems. For example, even if we take course of action 1 and we put all the information available to the library onto computers, the second part is not addressed. Will the users become aware? No. I've seen a whole collection of unnavigatable IT systems in my time. Okay, so course of 1 would definitely solve that first part of the problem. Absolutely, the information will be centralized, the information will be there. But to really solve the whole statement, to really address everything, we need both. We need the library staff to be trained in computer operations as well. So it's not A or B, it's A and B. Here we have one with 3 options. Okay. There has been a continuous increase in the number of dropout students of government-run primary schools. Course of action 1. Government should immediately set up a committee to review the situation and suggest measures to reverse the trend. No reason to immediately dismiss it. Let's keep on reading. Government should conduct orientation programs for parents of the students, emphasizing the need of educating their children. Again, maybe we have better options out there, but I see no reason to dismiss it entirely. Course of action 3, government should shut down state-run primary schools where drop rates are more than 50%. This last point is the reason why I needed to include some sort of definition for the idea of best, right? Because if your problem is the statistics, oh yeah, this will sort the statistics immediately, right? This will sort the statistics completely. I mean, really high ranking universities tend to get really high ranking results, not because their university is amazing, but because the best students apply there that we're going to get amazing grades to begin with. Okay, we're not just interested in the stats, we are interested in the problem which the stats are representing. So it's definitely going to be 1 and 2 here, not 3. Okay, 3 kind of solves the problem, but it solves the stats. It doesn't really solve the problem. Okay. We'll get a few more in and then we'll get that paper. I'm a man that can speak a lot, but even I'm getting tired. So, a lot of this is going to be very similar to the assumption ones before. A lot of this is going to be similar to the assumptions one before, but it'll be framed slightly differently. We're going to generally be looking at shorter pieces of text here, not big walls, which I have to pause for you to read for 5 minutes. The classic example of when we have assumptions and when they can sneak into questions are, why did you kill your dog? Or, you know, I'm sure you could fill out that sentence with plenty of other similar ideas. You can't answer that question without accepting you killed the dog. That's it. You can give a positive answer, you can give a negative answer. All answers imply you killed your dog. Okay, so this is what we're talking about when we talk about assumptions. They're just built into the question, not even related to the answer. Okay, since the CEO is going on a 1-month leave, he asked the CFO to take over the operations of the company for that period. I won't repeat myself too much, but these answers will again potentially be both, potentially be neither. It's not simply going to be 1 or 2. What might lead us to think that this assumes the CFO has necessary skills to lead the company effectively? What do we think? What might possibly suggest that? Why else would the CEO ask? Right? If the CEO didn't think that the CFO had the necessary skills, he would make alternative arrangements. Right? So, at least as far as the CEO is concerned, yeah, the CFO does have the necessary skills to run the company effectively. 2 is a trickier one, though, at least to me. At least to me. What do we think? Quick show of hands. Okay. Do you think that this assumption is within the statement? So I'm guessing a lot of you think it's not within the statement. Think it is? Yeah, you haven't been wrong. Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. Okay. It's not going to be so direct, but it's definitely within the word asked. If he could not, if he had to accept the request of the CEO, it would be told, it would be instructed, it would be commanded, something like this. So it's going to be the implications, even in the definition of a word or a choice of language. Absolutely, it's an assumption in the question that the CFO may not accept the request of the CEO. Maybe that's a bad assumption, and the CEO will correct his viewpoints if the CFO tries to turn him down. However, it's an assumption in the question nonetheless, or an assumption in the statement nonetheless. Organizations should promote people based only on their contribution to the company, not on the duration of their service within the company. We've got two options, remembering that it could be both or neither as well. The duration of service is not a reflection on the contribution that that employee has made to the company. To me, yeah, that's like the entire point of what they're saying. That's really what they're getting at. Why would they want to promote someone for reasons they don't think is a reflection on their ability? As with the first one, the second is the most interesting. It is possible to empirically measure the contribution that each employee has made to the company. These are the sorts of assumptions where even if you think, oh yeah, that sounds like a great plan. I know someone who's been at my workplace a very long time and they're still useless. And you think, oh yes, this sounds like a great idea. Let's promote people based on that. This assumption will come in when you try to implement it, right? This assumption will come in when you're actually trying to structure your company like this. You'll realize, well, I want to promote people based on this, but how am I doing that? I've got to find some way to turn that into numbers, turn that into a list of priority for promotion. It doesn't look so obvious that it's an assumption, but if you can't empirically measure the contribution, then this is never going to work. Remember, assumptions are things which cannot not be true. So again, actually for both of these, the answer is both. For both of these, the answer is both. Yeah, okay, the only one of these 3 points as we get close to 5 o'clock I'm going to highlight is the last one. When we're going through these fact analysis questions, I want you to think, if you can understand the previous question types in this almost bullet point shortened way, you really understand the statement, you're going to make your life a lot easier if you can break this down. Let's look what they actually look like. Fact 1, fact 2, fact 3, and potential conclusions. If you can list your understanding, or if you can break down those first question types into things like this, I would be impressed if you could still manage to do that. Like that, that's just the most concise way you can do it. So, graphics can tell news. All newspapers have graphics. Some newspapers have text. In the second half, these are basically syllogisms. Again, in the second half, I'll be explaining what that word means if you're not familiar. But notice the return of the quantifiers, right? All, some, they're going to be nice and important. You've got to make sure that the quantifiers in the question or the quantifiers in the original fact support the quantifiers which appear in the answer. Let's focus just on 1, 2, and 3 aren't worth looking at. Okay, so we think all newspapers have graphics and some newspapers have text. Those some newspapers which have text must also have graphics because all newspapers have graphics. That's enough. We will be going into more detail. I'm going to recommend what we call the Venn diagram method for syllogisms, and that will apply perfectly here as well. But in a time-sensitive exam, if you can follow that line of reasoning and you can make one like that yourself, take the answer and move on. Right, take the answer and move on. Yeah, they do get difficult though. Okay. This fact analysis, etc., is essentially the linking section between these logical conclusion-based, assumption-based question parts and going right into the more mathematical, the ordering puzzles, etc. So I would think of this as sort of going halfway between those two sections. The crucial thing here is to not let any small, potentially questionable assumptions sneak in within your own thinking. So, the new CEO of a research facility met with its security in charge to assess the security protocols in place. During the meeting, the following facts are gathered. So these are basically just a whole bunch of logical restrictions. Okay. We can go through them one at a time, but it's most important that we see all of these are conditions which need to be met. Right? All of these are conditions which need to be met. The research facility must have at least one supervisor, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We don't care about the labor regulations, that's what counts. To maximize efficiency, don't care. There must be exactly 10 security guards. Okay, there must be exactly 10 security guards. Even within this quite compressed section, we can compress it a little bit further. Security guards are only required between 8 and 5 Monday to Sunday. Again, shortening it even more. The facility employs 4 supervisors and 16 security guards, making the total strength of the security team 20. Okay. The total weekly employee cost for the security team is 16,000. Let's look at what the answers could possibly be. Again, it's not just one. Sometimes it can be both. Sometimes it can be a couple. 1/5 of the total cost of the security team is for supervisors. I mean, 1/5 of the security team is indeed supervisors. What's sneaking in here? What's sneaking in here? One-fifth of the total cost of the security team is for supervisors. What's sneaking in?
We don't know if they are the same amount.
Yeah, we don't know that they're paid the same amount at all. Okay. If you saw it on a maths question, you would assume that and do it quickly because they haven't given you any further information. Here, they're not giving you any further information or enough information. Is itself an answer? Is itself useful? At least one supervisor must work more than 40 hours per week. So they must have a supervisor on. They must have a supervisor 24 hours a day. So across that, essentially, you're gonna have to do some maths. Okay, we've got 4 supervisors, and we've got 7 days of 24 hours. Actually, if you do the maths, yeah, you can have people working less than 40, but to make up that time, actually one person will have to work out over 40. Okay, with a pen and paper, I trust that's within your ability. For right now, I'll just jump to the answer. The security guards do not work more than 40 hours per week. This can't be concluded. Kind of for a similar reason as the first one. Yes, maybe if you split the total time evenly up between everyone, it comes out to be less than 40 hours. But we do not know that that time is being split equally between everyone. So don't let that assumption sneak in. It's great if you're really pedantic and you try not to make any assumptions whatsoever. Actually, I'll let you just cut a lot of these off. The majority of the security team's employee cost is due to the guards. No, as far as the question is concerned, maybe the 4 supervisors split that 16 grand equally, and the security guards work for free. Obviously, that's crazy and impractical, but if it's not limited off by the options given on the sheet, consider it still active. Okay, consider it still possible. Okay. We have a little bit more detail here, including them doing the maths, which is implied in part B. But really, they're just saying what I have said. Okay. Let's leave it there for a little moment, shall we? So we're going to come back in sort of half past. If you're sort of unaware, all of these sessions will run from 3:30 to 5. We'll have a half an hour break for everyone to regain their humanity, and then we'll be going from 5:30 till 7. Okay, let's have that break. I'll see you guys in about 25 minutes or so.
Oh my god. Okay, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So are you going to like pick the annex or just like their entrance exams? I think just their entrance exams. Try. Okay. Well, I didn't buy the book like from Amazon, like I don't know, 2 months. It's huge, and it's really okay because it's still like this. It's like examples and why it's correctly typed, and like also like has like some lecture like to prepare for all that. So I was thinking just because like I'm applying this like international school, like for the scholarship and everything, maybe it would be good if I would do them and just be a because like that was like my only choice. Like so it's kind of yeah, because then you have to do it visually and you have to like buy a whiteboard. And, yeah, it's really strange. Like if you do it like with your laptop and then you can't write notes or anything, so you have to buy a whiteboard and like a black marker and just like write on the whiteboard those mathematics stuff like because for you see for this part we need to do quick math. I was like I'm lost for it. I'm doing that years. So I hope I will just ace like the social aspect. That's again doesn't matter. But I will try because like then I will see which one was better and I say like take this test. Yeah, that's fine. Because I don't like we will do both online. So which part of the so like this what's your favorite part? If you give me very oh wait, you have like the spring break. No, I'm not spring break, but like break to go actually not or yes, yeah. Today I just okay. That's not probably so cute, which we have to work what do you do? Training. Oh, it's strong. Oh, so what is the exam? Like, whatever you can study. You will be one. But we like I remember when I was like in leadership at EY, like they also have like some kind of like entrance exam like testing similar to this one. You have to like and then just like I'm a teacher and some HR. So it's really fun. I think after that we should have like a lot of yeah, that was I'm at the loss of good work. And so like which kind of like were the previous like looking at stuff like that. Yes, sir. but I don't have much time to like explore because I have some like intensive program and it's like really like people are usually go like to be honest. I don't even. Oh, okay. So, but usually it's like the downtime. Yeah. It's also like it's like feel like it's a really quiet kind of. It's like a really quiet place. Yeah. Like people are usually coming. Yeah, I think yeah. It's like working at technology. I just started there 2 weeks ago. Oh, so you're like so lucky there. Yeah, because they're trying to teach us. You know, like work. Yes, yes. Yes. Department is actually like you're going to like some financial service or accounting. You have to be like really careful. Sure. Maybe they're trying to put like 3 months. Mm, no. Yeah, that's not for. It's not for. Not for you. I can say. Oh, how long you want them? Yes. Because everywhere I was actually so much willing to that I didn't know what it looks like, but the best we got. Yes. That was interesting. I want to try that and maybe you should explore it. Yes, yeah. It's like the best. Um, well, at the moment, I'm like, so yeah. I did like tax consulting, and before that, I worked for like a German company for like an internship, like in like a digital frame or business development. So basically, tax consulting and that, but that's like good for the digital frame stuff, which was like more from competition. And then from that competition, they like the award was that internship and like implementing the solution. Well, tax consulting was something that's like my my home base, you know. So yeah, it's like really fun because it's really international and it has like both like the legal and economic aspects. Right, that is like always like your regulations, like you're keeping up with all kind of industries. So it's like super cool. Like basically when you have to evaluate like companies and feel like what's their best decision. That's what really interesting. So yeah. But maybe I would probably stay in consulting my whole life. But I'm more from the international law perspective and you know, policy side. But like in tax, like my quit that job is because we had to know accounting very well. And I was like, oh, that was so hard. And I was like, I was just glad that like mom would do it. So I was like, yeah, maybe some other activity because like one that's why you need to know all the other side of the story as well. Yeah. So I was like, yeah. You can alright. You will try with this masters and the social aspect a lot better. Yes. So what is engaging with here? It's your tech parents. I remember like that near that one shopping mall, right? I think I saw a building there. Yes, 'cause I know there was like a fancy equipment store there. Yes, no, yes, so I remember it. Wait, is it like the first quarter or quarter? So basically, so basically the big quarters here. Yes. Digital. Maybe how it's like, but that's like, I would call like maybe like entrepreneurship and maybe it's flips or not so much like for your generation, for example. Yes, maybe our generation. Oh, yeah. So are you more like in the financial sphere or you know? It's like the most connections to like the underrated. It's like you know, is it in so much or is it really not so much or sure. So basically here we just take very under yeah, I guess it's for the second one. Should have like English and German or like English and French or English and English and German. Because like for example in my country it was like more French for example or German maybe up to schools. So kind of just a question. Yes. They had the opportunity and yeah, so the choose. I would think it's that way.
Let's slowly get ready to restart. Okay, let's restart then. We'll see if the couple of people in the room that were here for the first half are coming back. Okay. And just as we get restarted, let me give us a sort of recap up to where we are. Don't worry, not going to be going through the whole thing again. I just want to say that I said the break was going to be just before the last two sections. We're only one example off. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the structure of an argument, and then yes, we'll be moving on to the analytical puzzles, the sort of more strict logic stuff and the mathematical side of things. A lot of this structure of an argument stuff is going to come down to, and it's good news really, that same concept of underlying structure. Okay, does the argument really address what we need it to? Is it unnecessarily strong? Okay, really strong emotional arguments are just as bad frequently as unnecessarily emotional conclusions. Is the logic of the argument sound? So again, I've just included the options here as well to highlight it's not just going to be 1, 2, or 3. It could be both, neither, 2 out of the 3, etc. Okay. So, should the censor board also judge the quality of movies so people do not waste money on time on movies that are boring? Okay. Slightly misleading in terms of calling this a statement. Frequently, this will not be the case. It will be what we have here. And it's a question, and we need to judge whether the responses to it are strong. And when you read strong, I want you to think of, are they questionable? Do they bring up topics or ideas which in themselves need some sort of argument or some sort of further expansion? So let's look at argument 1. This will encourage producers to make only good movies. Our second argument is no. People differ in their choice and tastes, and it is impossible to ascertain quality of movies. Do we think they're both strong? One strong but not the other? What are we thinking? What are we thinking? So to me, argument 1 is weak because argument 2 is strong. Right? I do not want anyone to turn up and give some objective idea of what a good film is. Okay? So because argument 2 is good, no, it seems like a good idea, but who judges what is good? It is argument 1, which is much weaker. Okay, wait for that little announcement to go away. So, Indian students, let's not wait. Indian students who have completed their education at premium public institutions in India should be banned from taking up jobs abroad, as India gains nothing from their expertise. Argument 1. Yes, it is the only way to sustain the high quality of teaching in Indian educational institutions. 2, no, eventually most of these students come back to work in India, and their experience of working abroad makes them more effective workers. No student should be free to decide where they want to work. Now, I can imagine at least 2 of these resonate with you, right? At least 2 of these resonate with you. Personally, I'm very skeptical of the first argument. Because actually, why would people being banned from working abroad suddenly affect the quality of teaching in Indian universities? Right? This is what I mean. There are further questions to be asked. They're talking about things which are not strictly linked. Maybe if they expand upon this and answer some of these questions, make very clear the link as how this would possibly affect the quality of education in Indian universities, then we can talk. Then we can potentially have a good argument. As it stands, no. So let's look at the other 2. Because actually you might be thinking, actually 2 and 3 both seem good. 2 problems with that. 2 and 3 is not an option. Right? Look at the orders. Look at the answer grid. The reason that one of these is weak, is because, yeah, you might intuitively agree that students should be free to decide where they want to work, but that's something that requires further argument. Yeah, you probably don't question it that much because you believe it in your heart, right? But that's not how this really works, okay? Why should students be free to decide where they want to work? Does that really even address what's being said in the statement? Does it address India gaining nothing from their expertise? Okay, again, maybe this point could be expanded upon and made good, but right now it's not that great. Argument 2 is much better. Okay, maybe they might need some stats to show that really the students do come back, at least most of them. But they make an argument why it could end up benefiting India in the long term. It really does address what is asked in the question or put in the statement. There's an argument behind it. It's expanded upon and it's linked back to the original statement. Only argument 2 is strong. Okay, only argument 2 is strong. So here, these aren't exactly practice questions. These are the sorts of ways you should be thinking about breaking down. You should be breaking down these arguments. Should doctors be banned from carrying out private practice? Yes, this will improve the quality of service in public hospitals. That connection is needed. Why? Does banning them from carrying out private practice ensure good service quality in public hospitals? Again, maybe you can make an argument, but as of yet, you have not. Okay. Should there be reservation for women in Parliament? No, the Home Minister does not think so. Okay, not going to spend a ton of time on this one. We have better sources for what should and should not be than one person's opinion. Okay. And maybe if the Home Minister was allowed to be a woman, she would have a different viewpoint. Right? So, no. No, it's not a good argument. I also can't imagine standing in front of a row of people and telling them that it is. Okay, so now we're moving on properly to sort of those last 2 sections. We're looking at the analytical puzzles. You will probably have done similar logical puzzles before. I'm particularly going to be highlighting the ordering problems because they're most common. Mathematical puzzles, actually, even though it's my background, we're going to look at a couple, we're not going to look at a ton. Because honestly, even with a long time for a presentation, they can draw upon maths from any sort of high school and younger sort of range. I am not going to be able to give a synopsis of mathematics up until high school age, even within 3 hours. Okay, so yeah, we're going to look at a couple for what you can expect, but that's an endless task, so we're not going to dive into it. Input output. We will look at a series of steps, think like an algorithm, and we will be trying to infer what the algorithm is doing at each step. We're going to highlight a couple of these because, not going to lie, they're unpopular. Okay. Yeah, so I've said this before, but it definitely applies most here. Okay, for this section, Honestly, you can answer the question just from the question. There will only be one solution, and then it's a matter of going, okay, which answer is it? But you should be answering this one really before you even look at the questions. Drawing a diagram for these questions is borderline non-optional. Okay, you're going to be trying to keep too much track of too many things to be trying to do it in your head or anything like that. The last point I'm including is very important here. They will be circular or in a line. So you might be talking about people sat around a table. Okay, you might be talking about people sat around a table, or you might be talking about people sat in a line. Okay, but that's pretty much all the variance, or pretty much all the variation you will have. This is a nice example. AJ's work requires him to travel to cities C, R, G, J, and B. Each city for one day and not necessarily in this order, from Monday to Saturday. So really, if I'm telling you to make a diagram, let me be more specific. Firstly, this is definitely not one of our circular arrangements. Okay, this is definitely in a line. You need to think, how many slots do you have to fill? In this case, we are going to have 6 every day except Sunday. And then how many sort of things do we have to put in there? He visits G neither on the first day nor on the last day, but he visits it earlier than R. He visits J the day after he visits R. He visits C immediately before the rest day. J and B had a 2-day gap between their visits. He visited B immediately after the rest day. To get started on these questions, because to be honest, it's getting started that is frequently the tricky part. In the beginning of this presentation, I likened this particularly to Sudoku. This is for that reason. Once you get the ball rolling, once you get one in a good slot, or you sort of get started, it's frequently not so bad. I want to give you the most advice on how to get started. Sometimes you'll get lucky and there's one clue which pretty much just gives you the starting position of 1. We don't need to spend a ton of time talking about that because those ones tend to be a bit easier. In this case, there's no immediate, oh, he visits C on Tuesday, something like that, right? So we haven't got an immediate thing to get started on. What you can do is think of things relative to each other. So, for example, I can see that we're going to have C rest B somewhere in there, right? Because if we look at tip 3, we know that C is just before the rest day, and if we look at 5, B is immediately after the rest day. So we know that those 3 are going together, right? We know C gap B goes somewhere. Then we can start looking at the others. Just like Sudoku, you will occasionally have a couple of options which both remain possible right up until the last second, and then, oh no, only one of them works. So you will have to keep track of possible orders as much as the definite order. For example, the reason I bring this up is 4. So we know we have C gap B, and we know that there is a 2-day gap between J and B. So it could be J, C, rest B. But notice it could be B, which, okay, we know goes with the C, the rest day B. But then there's another 2-day gap and there's J. So we can't be dead sure. Just because they're written in the order J and B doesn't necessarily mean they are in that order. Okay. He visits G neither on the first day nor on the last day. This is the sort of option. This is the sort of option which is going to help you limit down possibilities at the end. Okay, when you're sort of close and it looks like, this is the only one that gives us any advice about G. So probably G is going to be one of the last letters we place. The questions will end up like this. I'm not going to sit here and solve the whole ordering puzzle. Okay, those are the tips, and we've got plenty more to be talking about. These are the sort of questions that will come up. Trying to work any of these out in isolation, really difficult. But if you have the order written out in front of you, even if, for example, you are correctly thinking in time per question, etc., you can actually spend a little bit more time on these, because at the end, you can answer sort of 4 questions in as quickly as you can move your pen, right? So it's worth investing that time. Make sure you have the order down exactly. And then answering these is trivial. Okay, but you're not getting anywhere without working out that order in its entirety first. Okay. So this is going through this is really going through what we were saying. Okay, so we get this final order here. Notice that I indeed did have to be careful that J does not necessarily precede B, because if we look here at the end, it doesn't. If we look here in the end, it doesn't. And yes, as predicted, G is indeed the last letter to be placed, since G has to become before R. We have an example. Sorry. We have an example with one of the circular orderings as well. Okay. Again, I'm not going to be sitting here taking you sort of step by step through the whole ordering. We're just going to talk about really the similar advice that I gave you for the non-circular ordering, with a little extra piece of advice or observation. These will really all be what I would call relative measurements. Okay, so as long as, for example, you're reading it clockwise or indeed anti-clockwise and you get the same order, it's not going to make any difference who you put at the top of the circular table, for example, or who you put at the side. Give that table a spin, it's still the same order. Give that table a spin, it's still the same order. In fact, there's only one of these which even sort of differentiates left from right. So it will make a difference whether you're reading clockwise or anti-clockwise, but only because of that rule. Only because of that rule. If we were to start, again, we're not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to make sure that you know how to start. To me, my eye immediately goes to 3. B is the neighbor of U. Okay, we don't know if it's going to be BU or UB, but it gets us started. And at that point, I'm scanning the other hints. I'm thinking, which other ones mention B? Which other ones mention U? Because that's really going to be where you get yourself on the ladder. That's going to be where you get yourself started, and you know how to proceed from there. Notice example 6 here talks about what I was talking about a moment ago. Here we can talk about clockwise direction only because of this first rule where it says second to the right. Everything else would essentially be symmetric, but this is what makes question 6 answerable. For a circular diagram, it should look something like this. Okay. I've also included this note at the bottom because it would be real important. Okay. I ran this last year as well, and I had someone ask me a question about this, about how are we meant to know this in advance. Honestly, it's a very reasonable question, so I included it here. You should assume that they are facing into the table. It's their right, not yours. Okay? But then draw a diagram like this. Notice, again, very Sudoku-like. We've got R/V. We don't know which it is. We'll come back to it later. We'll eliminate one of those once we know more about it. Or maybe once we know that V has to be in a particular place or R has to be in a particular place. But for now, just write your options because you can't not write something until you're absolutely certain. You frequently just won't get to that point. Okay, so you've got to have some way of notating. Oh, this is a maybe. You'll notice on the right-hand side, they've put S with question marks. Whatever notation works for you, but you need to put something down. Okay. And then they're taking you through statement by statement, which is great. However, I mainly just want to sort of get you started, show you how to do these. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, not going to spend a ton on the mathematical puzzles because I can't encapsulate 12 years of education. However, I will draw to your attention some of the things that need to come up a little bit more. This will include the skill which frankly all of my students struggle with much more than the mathematics. And that is turning word problems into mathematics. Okay, these are not, some of them will be, but these are not necessarily just going to be equations that you're given and you're asked to solve them. You will need to sort of algebraify stuff. That's an important skill. These questions are normally geometric. Okay, as I said, I can't make a synopsis for such a large amount of mathematics. Let me, however, give you some specific tips. If you're familiar with similar and congruent triangles, good, they really like them. Okay, if you're not, or you were familiar with them, but it's been a while since school, I would honestly recommend that you go home and look up similar and congruent triangles. They use them for a lot of questions. I don't know why, but I can just give you that tip. As if to prove my point. The head of an institution was standing behind a 4 feet high rostrum. If you don't know what a rostrum is, good news, it's not going to be important. In an afternoon on a sunny day to address his students. He is 6 feet tall and casts a shadow in front 9 meters, which is 9 meters long. If he completes his lectures in the next 30 seconds and leaves the place, what will the length of the shadow cast by his rostrum be after his departure? You will need to make diagrams for these geometric questions. Even if you're sort of not yet turning it into algebra or anything like this, you'll need a diagram to really know how to get started. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about in similar triangles, this is what I'm talking about for similar triangles. Okay. The small triangle here is just a squished version of the big one. Okay. I always tell my students, think about dragging the diagonal corner in a Microsoft Word document. Okay. And it's working out, okay, if we stretch 4 feet up to 6 feet, that's a factor of 1.5. So x times 1.5 has to be 9. And you'll get that x is 6 quite quickly. but you need to know that that's the technique you're meant to be using. Okay, the diagram will help you. Once you have the diagram in front of you, you're going to have a much better chance of going, oh, this technique's going to work, or maybe I can use this. It's going to be a real struggle if you don't. Here's another example. Again, they have a big tendency towards geometry. Okay, big tendency towards geometry. There is a circular park in a city locality. Radin walks from any point of the park and goes across the park every day, covering a distance of 200 meters. Now the city authority has decided to widen the park such that the distance covered by him would be 250 meters. What is the increase in the area of the park after the widening of the park? You may or may not need a diagram to recognize that 200 meters and 250 meters are diameters. But the diagram's always going to help. Okay? But then from here, yeah, I'm not going to patronize you. I think that's okay mathematically for you to work out, okay? Once you're nice and careful recognizing that that is a diameter, and areas are worked out with the radius, so you need to halve those. It's just a matter of using pi r squared twice and looking at the difference. Okay, it's not too bad. You just need to recognize what you're looking at and know how to use it. And there we go. It's a number. So that really is going to be sort of all my work on the mathematical puzzles for the reasons I've already spoken about. Let's look at these input-output puzzles, and then I'll finally get on to talking about what are these syllogisms that I've mentioned a couple of times. So, absolutely most of your time should be spent focusing on the example process they give you. Specifically, maybe you'll need to look through a couple of steps. Maybe you'll think, oh, in the first step, I think this is what they're doing. Test that theory. Go through the rest of the steps. Is it sort of meeting that plan still? The last thing you should be looking at is what counts as finished. Okay, is there something notable about that final order which you can use to infer what the process was to get there? Okay, those are two really important things. Just to give you a heads up, when it comes to, these will be words, letters, numbers. They're not really going to come down to the definitions of the word. That's not really how it works. It's going to come down to word length. It's going to come down to alphabetical order, numerical order, things like this, or maybe some other similar ordering. Okay, it's not going to depend on the meaning, and they will be more ordered in the way a machine would order them, right? Not fancy new AI, some sort of step 1, step 2 type process. Here is exactly what a 1 will look like. I think it stops at step 7. Yeah, cool. So it will always be word and number arrangement machines. That's just sort of how this goes. When given an input line of words and numbers, it arranges them following a particular rule for each step. The following is an illustration of the input and arrangement. Okay, that set of directions doesn't just go for this question, it goes for every question in this section. Okay, so think about what's the difference between the input and the first step? What's the difference between the first step and the second? Immediately, I can see the only difference between the input and step 1 is that 66 has been dragged to the front. Normally, you shouldn't. It will either be the front or the back that's changing, rarely both. Though, of course, if it is both, you should be able to see that plainly. So first, it was 66 being pulled to the front. Notice none of the rest of the order has changed. And then it's again being pulled to the front. Again, none of the order changes. These are all changing one sort of placement at a time. So we now jump a little bit. I'm looking at step 7. This is our final step. This is the one I recommend you sort of look at as what counts as finished. Because if you can understand what counts as finished, you're going to have a much better chance of going back and going, okay, how did we get here? Can anyone recognize the pattern that we have arrived at step 7? Firstly, even before you start thinking about the specific order of the words and the specific order of the numbers, you should recognize that it's one of each, alternately. Okay, you don't have to solve everything in one go, but once you get started, it gets easier. And yes, you can sort of think about the ordering of the numbers and what they're doing, and then think about the ordering of the words and what they're doing. They don't really end up falling under the same ordering rules. Okay, so here we can see that it's number word, number word, number word. And the easier one is to very quickly see that the numbers are descending. Very quickly see that the numbers are descending. For the words, again, there are only so many options. It's going to be word length. It's going to be something to do with alphabetical order. Really, I'm running out of options already. Okay, there can only be so many things. Now, the questions that actually come with this setup are not just going to be directly, hey, what's this machine doing? It's going to be, you're the machine, now go. You need to go through every step with that string of nonsense that the machine would have following those same rules. Okay. Again, you should just write out step 1, step 2, go through like the machine, and only then do you start looking at the questions. Because just like with the rearrangement puzzles, once you've got full step 1, step 2 all the way to finish, the questions can be answered as quick as you can read. Okay, it's worth making sure you can just write out the whole process from beginning to end. Also, just to be clear, here, the letters are going in ascending alphabetical order and the numbers are just going descending, and it's alternating number words. Okay, these, as I said, aren't particularly popular because they can sometimes be unintuitive and you just look at it and have a little second of what am I even looking at. But once you're a bit more used to them, they actually can't get that complicated. There is essentially only so much they can throw at you. Yeah. So here, they follow my advice very nicely. Okay, if you're getting a bit confused, all they've done is shorten chicken to C, 1 to W, etc., which is really highlighting that, yeah, even they know it tends to be only the first letters that count. Okay, but you should be going step through like this. Step 1, they just brought the 71 to the beginning. Step 2, they brought the B to the beginning. You're just doing that same process until at the end, we have that same pattern. Descending numbers alternating between ascending letters. Okay. Here's another one. Okay, so step 5 itself is a bit confusing, but sometimes you just need to note that step 5 is saying that we're done, right? As long as you can replicate that in your own work or in your own sort of rearrangement, you'll be fine. Looking at step 4, we can see that it's definitely not alternating anymore, right? All words and then all numbers. Yeah, again, you don't need to spend too much time focusing on the numbers. They're clearly going down. Let's work out what's happening with the letters. Okay, looks like it could be an alphabetical order. We're starting with an A, but boring. B is nowhere near that middle of the alphabet, so we've got to be looking at something else. Hopefully it's clear from here that it's word length, right? Hopefully it's clear from here that it's word length. As I said, there's only so many options. One thing I do want to bring your attention to, though, is not just input and out. It's not just the first step and then the last step. You'll notice actually this process is a lot shorter than the previous ones, and that's because we're not only bringing the words to the front according to length, we're bringing the numbers to the end according to size at the same time. So if we'd use the previous one, it would be taking 8 steps. Here it's only taking us 4 because we are ordering the words and the numbers at the same time. So that's crucial because if you only notice the final order, there's no way you're going to get the question about the number of steps correctly. Okay, you need to see that they are doing each of these at all steps. Okay. Okay. Let's look at these other sections, areas of other reasoning. I am going to be focusing mainly on the set theory. The decision making, not for that long, mainly because it's going to be very, very similar to the course of action, but with a different task name on it. It's good news for you and also good news for the presentation. We don't have to spend a long time focusing on it when we all already know it's been quite a long time. Ranking and ordering, we'll actually be looking at that a little bit more because it's not exactly the same as the ordering puzzles like you kind of expect it to be. Venn diagrams and syllogisms are going to kind of link together because yes, they have specific Venn diagram type questions. But I am going to be suggesting Venn diagrams as a method for the syllogisms question. So those will end up coming together quite nicely. I'm also going to focus a little bit more on set theory, purely because I don't know which countries everyone comes from. And in the UK, I did not study set theory until I went to do mathematics at university. Okay, I teach my students set theory now, and there's nothing crazy complicated about it. But I wouldn't want anyone to go into the exam and they just have no idea what this set theory is, full stop. This is an example of why I'm not going to focus on the missing value section for that long. I don't think it's going to be a struggle for you. Okay, the one piece of advice I will give you, or really sort of emphasize, is look, are you sort of adding or multiplication is the biggest one, right? Is it a constant difference, like between 7 and 11, which is 4, between 11 and 15, which is 4, etc.? Or is it what we call a common ratio? 6 divided by 3 is the same as 12 divided by 6 is the same as 24 divided by 12. Those are the real ones you need to pick up on, because hopefully you can just recognize the last 3. There's not any variance, okay? It will just be exactly the square numbers, it will be exactly the cube numbers, or it will be the Fibonacci sequence. It won't be something like 1 over the squares or something like that. It will simply be square numbers, okay? If you can recognize 1, 4, 9, oh yeah, that's the square numbers, you're going to be fine. I would, however, recommend that you at least think about the cubes, because most people can recognize square numbers just going through the school system. Cubes come up much less frequently, okay? But if you can recognize 1, 8, 27, 64, you're still going to be okay. I suspect everyone has seen it, but I don't really want to work on suspicions. If you haven't seen the Fibonacci sequence before, again, it can only be this sequence. You can't start it from another place, etc. But you can see you start with a 0 and a 1, and you get the next term by adding the previous 2 terms together. Okay, that's our rule here. But as soon as you see, or at least as soon as I see 0, 1, 1, 2, it's Fibonacci. That's fine. Cool. So which answer is this? Yeah, it's just our square numbers. Just our square numbers. Okay, maybe I'm biased and I can't take my maths nerd out of my head, but I'll recognize those quite quickly. So really, that's all there is to say about that. Let's keep it moving. These Venn diagram questions can be very helpful, or just as a method on its own. But they will help in set theory. They will help with the syllogism questions. Again, don't worry, I'll explain what that means. And they can be used in their own sort of standalone questions. Most of the time when they are their own standalone questions, they are in instances where you want to avoid double counting. I'll do an example with my students where I ask everyone that is female to hold up their hand. I count them. I ask everyone that has brown hair to hold up their hands and I count them. And then I say, okay, let me add those numbers together. This is the number of people we have that are either female or have brown hair. I pick those 2 categories because the answer ends up being more than the people that are in the class. Like 2 popular categories. That exemplifies why we need this thing called the inclusion-exclusion principle. Avoid people being double counted. I will also just explain the notation. Okay. We will talk about unions and intersections. Actually, what they're called as a mathematical term is less important than being able to recognize what they represent. The speed version is the union. If it looks like a U, it's an OR. If it looks like an N, it's an AND. They would represent these parts of a Venn diagram. Okay. Perhaps you've seen this, but again, for example, I don't want to get to the statement of the inversion exclusion principle and you not even be able to read what it's saying. There also will be ones where subsets are important. I'll be talking about this again when we come into the syllogisms. I've already used one example earlier. All eagles are birds, but not all birds are eagles. Okay, that's a subset. When you have a subset like that, your Venn diagram is going to look like a donut. Okay, your Venn diagram is going to look like a donut when you have a subset like this. Here's an example. Okay, it's a classic example. Multiples of 4 in the middle, multiples of 2 in the bigger circle. Every multiple of 4 is a multiple of 2, but not the other way around. I have one example. I've been doing this too long. Okay. This is how it's going to start linking into syllogisms. And yes, now is the point where I should probably explain what those are. This is essentially where the study of logic started as far as the Greeks were concerned. You've probably, in fact, even heard of this syllogism. Okay? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Okay? So you can put this sort of as a subset. I said all birds are eagles. We're saying, sorry, all eagles are birds, and we're saying all men are mortal. So you can make the same donut Venn idea and then think, okay, so Socrates goes in the middle circle. Oh, there's no way he's possibly avoiding the outer circle. Okay, so this is how Venn diagrams are going to help you with these syllogism questions, especially as they start to get more complicated, right? Think about the newspaper one, where we're like, all newspapers have text, but some newspapers also have graphics, do some have both. Okay, not too much more complicated, but one step more complicated. You will appreciate having this Venn diagram that you've drawn for yourself. Some carpenters are deities. Okay, this is what we would much more think of as a normal Venn diagram. Yes, I have to start dropping in bad humor at this point in the presentation. Around the 2.5 hour mark, I need to have some level of attention. Okay, so yes, we can all think about the deity I'm talking about, but we can also think of plenty of carpenters who are not deities and plenty of deities which are not carpenters. Okay, so here you want to make sure that you've kind of got the full Venn diagram. You have every option covered, the overlap and sections which are not overlapping. Whereas you'll have examples like this. No color is a taste. Okay. You want absolutely no intersection here. You want these to not be crossing at all. Again, once you get to more complex syllogisms, this will be important. If you need to keep track or you're not familiar with the notation, we call it, if we have no intersection, so there's simply no overlap, we have this sort of circle with a line through it, which is our empty set, a bag with nothing in. That's all that means. How are we going to draw a Venn diagram that represents something like this? No reptile has fur. All snakes are reptiles. Therefore, no snake has fur. Okay. So it says no reptile has fur. So we are starting with two disjoint sets. Our blue circle is our reptiles, and our red circle is our fur habits, if you want to put it like that. We need them to be disjoint. We need them to be no crossover. All snakes are reptiles. Cool. We know that not all reptiles are snakes. We know that snakes are a subset of reptiles. So I'll put a new circle in the style of a donut then into that blue circle. And we can clearly see that there's no overlap between our green circle and our red circle. In fact, if there was, we're breaking one of our rules. Okay, so this is a really, because especially if you're not used to working with syllogisms, it's really hard to know even where to get started, which is why I'm actually going to spend a little bit longer on this suggestion, because I do not blame anyone who does not have experience in syllogisms. Okay, you just studied them if you go study philosophy, which, you know, most people want jobs. So here we can, even though it looks a bit weird just drawing 3 circles on your paper and going good, this is what this method allows you to do. Very useful. Have some more examples. All rabbits have fur. Some pets are rabbits. Therefore, some pets have fur. Starting off, we know that our rabbit circle is going to be inside our fur circle. Notice that I'm not, yeah, we need just some overlap between our yellow and our blue circle. But I'm not enforcing that the yellow circle be inside the red circle. There's nothing to suggest that. So if anything, you need to make sure that it goes out, because otherwise you're bringing in your own biases, you're bringing in your own ideas, and that's not really how this works. Therefore, some pets have birth. Yeah. We cannot have an overlap. We cannot have an overlap of the orange and blue circles without having an overlap of the orange and red. Notice even in that central section, like where the yellow is over here, it's still within the red because the whole of the blue is within the red. So yeah, absolutely, this must be true. You'll also get some syllogisms which include not. Okay, I've been drawn on this Venn diagram. This is A and not B. So notice we're not even including the intersection. We're not including that section in the middle. We are only looking at things which belong to A and A only. For that reason, if A is a subset of B to begin with, then the set difference is the empty set. Okay, you just get rid of the whole thing. So they start getting a little bit more complicated. No homework is fun. Some reading is homework, therefore some reading is not fun. No homework is fun. We're looking at no intersection, right? No intersection. Some reading is homework. Okay? Some reading is homework. So we include a crossover between the blue and red circles. But, you know, which of these is right? Any ideas? You like the second one? Do you have a sort of thought behind that? I would tend to agree with you, by the way. Don't let me make you nervous. Okay, because we haven't really got information about an intersection regarding these two. Okay. They could well be an intersection. So we also can't assume that there's no intersection like this. Good news. The answer doesn't depend on which one of these you draw. All it's saying is some reading is not fun. We don't need to know if the red circle overcrosses with the yellow. We need to know that there's some part of it which doesn't. Notice it's a sum, not an all, right? So actually, yeah, it's something I want to draw your attention to that you should be careful of. But if it matters, the question would actually be impossible, but I won't go into a ton of the details. These are the syllogisms, okay? I cannot emphasize this method enough because, I mean, we've gone through all these and it's no judgment because, as I said, I would have no expectation that anyone had pre-existing ideas of how to answer questions like these. But if you were given just this as a question and you didn't have any way to tackle it, yeah, it's not going to go well. So that's why, okay, some would say it's a disproportionate amount of time on this section, but I would expect people to have some mathematical methods already built up. I would not expect people to have a tool belt of logical tools. That's what happens when you talk for 2.5 hours. Okay. These are the syllogisms. This is going to move on to talking about this double counting thing, what we call the inclusion exclusion principle. All I'm introducing here is the notation of these vertical lines around the S. That is just simply saying how many things do we have in our set. I don't care if it's 1, 5, 9, and 23, or it's the letter H, a bird, your first child, and your wife. Okay, if there's 4 things in the set, the cardinality is still 4. Here we go. The rest of the build-up is so you actually have an idea of what's being said here. So, the number of elements which are in either set, which is all this means, so let the notation throw you off. The number of things which are in either set is the number of things which are in one, plus the number of things which are in the other, take away the number of things that are in both. So this is the thing that stops the double counting. This is what needed to be included in my previous example about women and brown hair. This is the one that stops the double counting. Okay, so they will throw in questions like this to make sure that you're not falling for that same idea. Oh yeah, I really do need more examples. Okay. Okay. Also, I mean, even if I didn't show you this notation, I hope that you would intuitively know that you need to take away the ones being double counted. Unfortunately, in these bigger cases, it gets much less intuitive. Okay, in these bigger cases, it does get much more less intuitive. Notice this last one is actually being added back on, because if you take away this section, you take away this section, you take away this section, you've actually double counted the double counting. So you need to add this one back on at the end. Yeah, and as you can see, starting from the one with two sets is much easier. Starting from the one with two sets is much easier. So here's what a question like that would look like. In an exam where 175 students appeared, 150 passed in physics, 150 in biology, whilst 10 failed in both subjects. Find the percentage of people who passed in both subjects. So, you need to be thinking about how can we turn this into a number of people that pass physics and a number of people that pass biology. And you need to do so carefully. Because, for example, it says 10 failed in both subjects. It says 10 failed in both subjects. But that could mean that you had, let's say, 25 fail in biology. But the remaining 15 did not fail in physics. Okay, so don't make sort of quick assumptions on this. Make sure you're being really strict with yourself. They then lay it out like this. Okay, so for example, when you're doing the question for yourself, if you understand the logic that's going on, you honestly do not need to use this notation, okay? If you can keep up with the idea, save yourself the hassle. But you do need to keep up with the idea. Notice when they say, as 10 students failed in both subjects, the number of students who passed in at least one of the two is 165. Maybe you arrive at that 165 number, but you misidentify it, and you think that's people that pass both. Right? It's real easy to have that confusion. And it's okay, so when we're talking about passed in at least one, that's this. Pass physics or pass biology. Pass in at least one. As long as you can as long as you can recognize that this is the number that goes in this slot, or this is the slot that this number goes in, you're going to be fine. Okay? And we're looking for people that pass both. So we're looking for this number. From there, it's just a matter of putting in the numbers you do know and putting in X for the one you don't. So here the number of people who pass biology is 140, that's given to you in the question. Number of people who pass physics, that's 150, that's given to you in the question. We would take away the intersection, but actually that's what we're looking for. We have the same solution in set theory as we do in the rest of mathematics. We don't know what it is, shove an X there. And we know that the other side of the equal sign for this reason is 165. The problem with these questions is getting that equation down on paper. Once you've got that equation down on paper, I don't think anyone's getting it wrong. It's getting there in the first place. Okay? Yeah, and then calculating percentages is okay. Okay. Yeah, as I mentioned briefly, this decision-making section is nearly identical. Honestly, nearly identical to the course of action section. So I'm not going to give you a big breakdown. We're just going to have a look. This one's a bit longer. I've been talking enough. I'll leave you to your reading. Cool. When you're looking through these answers, keep in mind what actually solves the problem. And to keep in mind what actually solves the problem, you need to keep in mind what the actual problem is. Okay? Lots of these might be reasonable courses of action if they really address the problem itself. So, for example, the CEO resigning, you could see how that could make sense. But once we go down, we keep reading. Okay, firing the head of the legal team probably doesn't seem realistic or reasonable. Recall the product from the market. Well, actually, getting towards the point, the product itself doesn't seem to be the issue. We can fire the CEO all we want, but if we don't stop the advertisement, which is part D, the problem hasn't gone anywhere. So you might consider A as well. Fair enough. But D should be immediate and obvious. Yes, obviously we need to do that, and then we work out if we're doing anything more. But first and foremost, stop the advertising. The advertising is the problem. Solve the problem first. Okay, especially remember that we're not asking you to bring in outside knowledge, views, etc. So just focus on the problem itself. Really make sure that it's justified by the fact that it attacks the problem. Okay. For these ranking and ordering questions, actually considering we've had so many topics which do come down to similar things, this is not actually exactly like the ordering puzzles you would expect it to be. You will be given the order. It's the questions that follow that count. As we go through these in the spirit of being honest, last year these also were not the most popular. Okay. However, all the better reason to prepare you for them. They nearly all tend to be row based. Think about, rows in a cinema, etc. Though there is one thing which I'll highlight. So, in a row, the position of Salim from the left-hand side of the row is 30th, and from the right is 25th. Find the total number of students in the row. This is basically the simplest form they can come in, and it's still one that commonly gets mistakes because people don't take away the 1. Okay. If you don't understand why we're taking away 1, think of a much simpler scenario. Think that we have three chairs in a row and I'm sitting in the middle one. It's second from the left, it's second from the right, but there are not 4 chairs. Right? If you can understand that on a smaller scale, it's exactly the same on the larger scale. But I write that in because I don't want anyone making that mistake. In a row of 65 people, Radha is sitting 26th from the left end of the row, and Krishna is sitting 31st from the right end of the row. Find the number of people sitting between them. Notice the first step. It might seem a little bit confusing to you. Why are they adding up the numbers together? It's because the method for this technique, or the technique for this question, will change depending on whether that number comes out to be bigger than the number of rows. Because you've got to think, if that comes out to be bigger than the number of rows, they've crossed over. Honestly, this sort of reasoning and this part of the question is broadly what made it unpopular or caused some confusion when I was doing a similar presentation last year. Okay, here it kind of works in the way you would expect because they add up to less than 65. When they add up to less than 65, you just take it away from your original answer and you get how far away they are from each other. Also notice if they did add up to more than 65, you would get an answer of -8 people between Radha and Krishna. At that point, you should be re-inspecting your method. Here, they've just changed it slightly. Okay, they've just changed it slightly to make clear the other option. Here, instead of doing sort of 65 minus the total, you do the total minus 65. But for very similar reasons with the first example, when I have my 3 chairs and I'm sat in the middle one, if there is an overlap, you need to take away 2 to account for the people themselves. Okay? For very similar reasons, you need to take away 2 to account for the people themselves. It's number of people sitting between them. Right? Okay. Have a check on these Venn diagrams, and then, if memory serves me correctly, we might even be done a little bit before 7 this time. Which of these diagrams best indicates the relation between tea, coffee, and beverages? When I said that we have specific Venn diagram questions in the test, as well as them being a useful method for other questions, this is what I mean. Okay, this isn't just a brain teaser at the end to make sure that you sort of kept up with the Venn diagram stuff. This is a question from the exam. What do we think? Yeah, very much so. Okay, tea and coffee are both beverages, but nothing is both tea and coffee. At least if it is, keep it away from me. Thank you. This is, okay, I've given you my technique, my recommendation for the syllogism questions. But this is what they actually look like when it comes to your exam. Okay, it's not just going to be, here's your conclusion, is it valid? You're going to have multiple conclusions available. Though again, I'm going to highlight, it could indeed be 1 and 2. Right? Okay, it's probably not going to be 1 and 3, because either some cables are wires or all cables are wires. But it could absolutely be that some threads are cords and some cables are wires, etc. Okay, so it's not just going to be a matter of one of them being correct, therefore get rid of the others. Really just draw the Venn diagram which represents those 3 statements. And just like the ordering question, if you can properly represent it with a Venn diagram, answering the questions here will be much quicker. Okay. And indeed we had. Okay, so even having been this having been my 2nd year of doing this presentation and this topic, I know that it's a lot. Even when I try and condense similar question types down into giving similar pieces of information, and I applaud each of your attention spans for just letting me go for 2.5 hours, let alone if it was going to be 3. Yeah, it's just quite a broad test. I wish I could make it easier in terms of the presentation, but we just have a lot to cover. It's going to be very similar for the language skills next week, and the quantitative skills, particularly because we have 2 parts. I suspect those are the ones which are most likely to run under time, if that's what you're looking for. But next week we're going to have a lot to cover as well, so I do appreciate your patience. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you very much, guys.